Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're going to go ahead and start our third Ed Talk. This is a new session style that we brought in last year and typically have some really interesting conversations. So I'm very excited to be here with some educators that I am a great fan of, but also a few people here I consider good friends. So it's really nice to have you all here. What did you all think of Shauna's talk? Pretty great, right? So nice to have you here. So I'm going to take a minute and just introduce our panelists, and then I have a handful of questions, and you will also note that there is a hashtag over there to which you can tweet your questions, and those will arrive right here through the miracle of technology on this iPad. And then actually I think there's someone who's kind of curating and pulling questions so that we have a range of interesting ideas coming through. So please go ahead at any point and share your questions there. So to my right and to your left is Theodore Chow.
That's me. What's
okay.
up?
I call him Teddy. I was like, do I say Teddy?
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, so Teddy / Theodore. He is from the Department of Teaching and Learning and is a professor here, an associate professor at Ohio State.
Assistant.
Thank you for the correction. And immediately to my right is Anna Volker, who is in the Astronomy Accessibility Program Coordinator from the Office of Student Life here at The Ohio State University and is the President's Prize winner from the year before this year right now, which would be 2018.
Okay, thanks.
And Shauna Chung, you met, PhD student in Rhetorics, Communication, and Information Design at Clemson University. And on your far right is Claire Camp-Dush, Associate Professor in the Department of Human Sciences here at The Ohio State University. So thank you all so much for joining us. We are here today to talk about the Excite part of our theme and to really think about how we can use teaching methods and technologies mindfully to create learning experiences that are both exciting and meaningful for our students. So I'm going to start out by kicking it off with one question, which is thinking about active learning, which is obviously not a new concept, but it's something that we're hearing talked about a lot right now. What does active learning mean to each of you? What do you think makes it important, in particular right now?
Okay, well, I can start since I'm on the end. I think what's really important about active learning is that we know that students remember things better when they aren't talked at for 80 minutes. But yet, I'm still surprised when I talk with my students how many professors they have that are still not using active learning. Plus, as a tenure track faculty member, I have a lot of shit to do. And I feel like active learning is funner. Is that a word? I do have a PhD. Is more fun, and it takes less time. And it helps students remember things more. So for me, I think active learning is just a better way to enter the classroom space, and it definitely has helped improve my teaching a lot. My teaching evaluations are way better than they were before I was using active learning.
I guess we'll just go down the line for now. I love what you said, and this idea of getting students to, I guess, engage with the content in a way where they're not being talked at. And I think a lot of that starts with getting them to step away from this grades-based motivation and maybe more towards engaging with the actual material itself. Because I think so many students are focused on, what do you want me to do? Like, just tell me the standards and I'll meet them. And I think getting students to say, to take ownership of their own work is the first step in maybe this idea of active learning.
So just to add to that, and to share a little bit about my background. So for me, when I think about active learning, I think about the large role that has to play in accessibility. So for my background, it's about disability inclusion and how we make an experience, something that, you might hear this term universal design for learning, so something that everyone can be a part of. And I think about active learning as a really important path towards making things more accessible and more engaging. And I just think back to, so a lot of the work I do, for example, is with students who are blind, and it's really important, especially when you're trying to be accessible, to have students actively involved in doing hands-on learning, getting models in their hands, getting them involved in demonstrations within the classroom or within, outreach if you're an informal educator. And so I think about active learning as a really important tool towards making education something more engaging as well as more accessible for all learners.
Wow. I just want to thank you for putting this panel together, and to follow up on what you're saying, Hannah. So much of what I do in terms of, I do a lot of teacher education, so I work with people who are becoming preschool and elementary school teachers. And for me, a lot of the real research on teaching and effective teaching has really all focused on the idea of listening and the idea of identity. Understanding who your students are, listening deeply to them, not just listening for a right answer or listening to see if they got the content that you told them to regurgitate to you, but actually trying hard to understand their identities, their abilities, presenting your work in non-ableist ways or ways that actually show that you are willing to learn from them. I think that's the most active learning.
You started to touch on this, and we've heard a little bit of this going down the panel, but I'd love to hear a little bit more, and this actually has come in from the audience. How do you all define active learning? And kind of what are some of you just started with a study, but what are some of the elements of your definitions that you think are particularly critical to it being successful?
Oh, just go like a zigzag pattern. All right. Okay. I don't know. I mean, I think this is maybe one of the problems that I am always critical of what we do in academia is it's hard to categorize these things. I feel like, especially with listening, like I've spent my entire life in my marriage, every day I'm learning how to listen better, right? And I still have no idea what I'm doing. And I think that's like the metaphor for teaching, right? Like once we categorize these things, then we know how to get even better, and we need to move on beyond those.
So I have a confession to make. When they, shared, the panel, they shared with us some of the concepts we'll be discussing. This term active learning was shared with me. I instantly went to Wikipedia and was like, what is active learning? So this is something this is not a term I had heard used too often. And so, luckily, I think it's really in the name. It's about getting students actively involved in the process instead of just lecturing at them, whether that's hands-on demonstrations or, even I remember when I was a freshman, I was in like my first ever astronomy class, and this professor comes in, he takes the chalk and he chucks it against the wall, and he was like, momentum. And he got my attention, and all of a sudden I was actively engaged, and the rest of the class was all of these hands-on demonstrations about the applications of physics instead of just making me write equations down, from the board. And that for me was a really great way to start, getting this idea of what it means to be actively involved and part of the learning instead of it being just a one-way street. It's a two-way conversation with the students.
When I thought about active learning, I also went to Wikipedia or went to Google for that. But when I also think about that term in isolation, if I think about active, so I was in another life, I was a middle school teacher in South Korea, and it's amazing what students will do for a piece of candy. They will speak so much English, and they'll be so motivated to speak English for just like a fun-sized Snicker bar. And they're not necessarily learning anything, but they're very active in the classroom because they are motivated by this thing, by this reward. And then on the other side, you have learning, right? And so I think when those two words are put together, it's when you are engaging students in a classroom where they are learning something in a deep way, where they're able to walk away with these concepts that you're teaching or that you're offering, and they're able to apply it to something in the world or to address a need, a real world need, instead of just seeing it as an academic exercise that lives and dies in the classroom.
What they said.
So it's interesting because there's obviously a range of different ways of thinking about this, which I like really, from thinking about listening and providing a space, and you talked about this too, Shauna, for students to bring their own identities so that they are seen and that they connect to things that matter to them, but also about what it means around where they take the things that they learn and where they go beyond the classroom. So you said something, Claire, that was interesting to me, because you said you don't have a lot of time, which I think a lot of people can relate to, but you made it sound like active learning was actually faster. But I think there's a perception, and I think it's just a justified perception, which is that I've been teaching my classes the way I teach them for a long time, and now I'm supposed to change and I have a lot of information that needs to be shared here. So how am I going to start, and where am I going to find the time to rethink how I teach and what I teach and what the models and practices are? So can you talk about? I'm really curious to hear from you, the easy part.
Right. Okay, good. So first of all, I think that we have this idea with our students that they're adults. Like, why should I spoon feed them things? And like, I'm like a professor. I'm really smart. And they're here, they're adults. They're not babies. So I think we like kind of have, and has anybody ever heard that from a professor? Or like, I see some head nods. And so, for me, part of the reason where this started shifting for me, and this gets back to accessibility, is I was in a group and I was saying something like this, like, my students want all these reminders. Why do I have to like give them reminders? And I'm like, they're adults. They don't need reminders. And actually, it was Jessica Phillips. She was like, oh, do you like reminders? She works at ODE, and I was like, I love reminders. I like ask everybody to remind me of things all the time. And then she's like, oh. Then I was like, oh. I'm totally have this idea. So I think that, first of all, we have to take ourselves out of this mindset that we're somehow superior to our students, right? That we are like, I did a presentation on digital distraction last year, and like one of the questions totally shook me. The person was like, oh, did you ever ask the students what they do to deal with digital distraction? I was like, no, because we don't treat them like they know things. So I think one thing with active learning is that when you treat them like, first of all, they know lots of things, and they're gonna probably remember it better. So in my class, family development, I have a lot of things on my plate. Like, I'm trying to get full professor, trying to get grants funded, trying to get publications out. My research is really what's going to advance my career as a tenure track faculty member at Ohio State, but yet I love my students and I care about teaching and I really care about what I'm teaching about. So I need to try to have the most impact that I possibly can without taking a ton of time. So I guess for a faculty member who would come to me and say, oh, I have my entire class prepped with lectures, why should I incorporate active learning? I guess because you care about your discipline, because you care about what you're working on. And like I think about with my students, if I want them to remember, 26 things from my class in 5 years, that would like blow my mind if they remember 25 things from my class in 5 years. When I think back to my undergrad education, I don't know, do you guys all remember your undergrad educations for those of you that have already graduated? Like, I don't know what you remember. I'm assuming not very much. And I really want them to remember what I'm teaching them. So my motivation is that. Plus, like I said, especially if you're a new faculty member and you haven't prepped a class, or like, let's say you get a new class, it takes time at the beginning to figure out what we're gonna do, and you don't know exactly how it's gonna go. But once you get it prepped, it's gonna take less time than designing an entire lecture. Do you know what I'm saying? Plus, new faculty members, I don't know if anybody's a new faculty member here, but a lot of times you over-prep or you're a grad student, and you're like, I don't want them to know that I don't know everything, so I'm going to lecture the entire book back at them. And that doesn't really work in terms of getting them to remember things. So again, I think it really helps cement the material. Plus, they're intelligent. They can read a book on their own. Why am I lecturing the book back at them? I'm boring myself when I do that. I used to do that, and I would I'm boring myself in this class. It's really bad if you're making yourself bored. Do you guys ever bore yourself? I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but it's bad when you're boring yourself. So to advance my career and to help my students, I think active learning is really effective. And again, it takes some time at the beginning, and I don't know what kind of resources I'll have available to you, but I'll just put a really quick plug in I'm in the College of Education and Human Ecology here. One of our educational technologists, Charles, is actually here, and there's Charles Logan. He's actually helped me come up at times. Like, I've used our educational technologists to come up with ideas because, PhDs are never really taught how to teach. So just want to give a shout out for if you might have resources available to you that maybe you aren't accessing.
I'm curious, Anna, you obviously have, maybe you can take just a minute and tell us a little bit about your President's Prize, but clearly you have been very, very motivated to do this work that's connected, I'm guessing, to some of what you were doing here as a student too. And so I'd love to hear, a little bit about what you're doing, and was there some kind of, or were there a few transformative moments for you in your undergrad education that really sort of drew you into the work you're doing now?
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you so much for the question. So right now, the main thing I'm working on is a big conference called Sci Access, and this is a 2-day event happening here in the Union on June 28th and 29th, and it's dedicated to promoting disability inclusion and diversity in the STEM fields. So I'm really excited about this, and one thing I do want to share is that actually registrations close tomorrow. So if you'd like to sign up, and actually what we're doing today, everyone from the Innovate Conference, if you sign up today, you get the half-off student rate. And it's all at sciaccess.org. So I am mainly focusing on this big event right now, but I think one of the things that really got me interested in outreach and in education in general, first as a kid, I got to meet this astronaut named Anusha Ansari, and she is the first Muslim woman to ever go to space, and she's the first person from Iran ever to travel in space, and she really inspired in me an interest in exploration. And it was really amazing to see someone, just find her own path. And so she's actually coming out as one of our keynote speakers, and I'm really excited to, hopefully others can be inspired as I was as a kid. But through Ohio State, I think there are so many really awesome initiatives, and the one that really got me hooked on this idea of access and accessible learning was something called Shakespeare and Autism. And this, I think, is active learning at its finest, because it's using Shakespearean plays to create these hands-on interactive theater games designed to help children with autism learn different life skills in a very unique and an imaginative environment. And that really, honestly, was a changing point in not only my career, but my life, because it helped me realize a new passion for making work accessible. And I think that's a really wonderful example of what it means to actively learn. And there, what they're learning is, more about communication than a specific discipline. But it's so important, even still, to just, create these spaces where people can be actively engaged in the content.
Thank you. So another question that's come in from the audience: how can we better prepare faculty and teachers to teach and lead actively from a place of trust in and empowerment of students? And you all have kind of touched on this as important. How do we help people learn to do that?
I think it would help if we were all vulnerable ourselves. I would like to see Ohio State University be the first university in the United States that requires every single person that gets a PhD to take a class in college teaching. Mm-hmm. I don't know why we haven't. Can someone tell President Drake that, please? I don't know why we don't do that. Everybody teaches somebody something, and it takes being vulnerable and real with your students to really connect with them and to own things when you do them wrong. And I think if we had an expectation that every PhD would actually be taught to teach something like we do for our individuals who are in K through 12, that would really help. And we're paying our faculty or trying to incentivize them to do that, but we're not doing that with our grad students, which to me is not smart. It's doesn't make sense to me. So I think a good place to start would be to actually teach higher ed instructors. Am I saying anything crazy here? How to actually teach. And again, like all of you, I'm sure you all care, I'm preaching to the choir. The people we need to preach to are the people that aren't here. So when we were talking about why I think active learning, what I would like to do to motivate people to care about it is to talk about my own experiences and how it's helped me be more productive in the other areas of my academic life.
Okay, I want to just echo on that. I mean, so Claire and I are both in the College of Education and Human Ecology. But I mean, one thing that is fascinating to me in the work that all of us do as educators is the conflation of content knowledge with the pedagogy, right? The idea that because you know something, you can teach. And that is such a myth, right? I work in math education. I mean, I think we all have stories of working with amazing mathematicians who can't teach, right? And it's no knock on them. They're brilliant. But the actual act and art of pedagogical engagement and understanding and listening is so rich and so based on the understanding and connecting to the souls of the students that you're working with. And I think we don't pay enough attention to how important that is.
And if I could just add to that, I think something really important to me that you touched on is just kind of trying to have an understanding of the students. And I think a really big part of that is just recognizing that they are whole human beings with so much happening in their lives outside of the classroom. And for me, this was never more clear than when I was in my, one of my first classes ever here at Ohio State as a scared and nervous freshman. I had a dear friend who was having all these mental health problems, and they were a classmate of mine, and they came to class one day and they said, "Professor, I'm so sorry, I'd love to stay for your class, but I just have to go eat something." And I'll just never forget how the professor reacted. He just smiled, said, "Manja, manja," and dismissed my friend. And he had no idea how crucial that decision of his was. Not to shame them, not to make them feel embarrassed or, silly. And I just think that was so important as a moment to see that these are people who have lives and, well-being to take care of beyond the classroom. And for me to see a professor prioritize that above the lecture he was giving that day really was an eye-opening experience.
So it's that kind of moment of being human and seeing the people in front of you as more full humans than just students too.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
I just wanted to second that idea. And for myself, I have 4 kids, and my husband has a job, full-time job, and I have a full-time job, and life is completely insane at my house. I have 4 boys. And also trying to get full professor and do my grants and all the other things I do, and teach them, et cetera. I have started a thing. I started it 2.5 years ago. I guess I've been doing this 2.5 years now, which is hard to believe, where I have lunch with my students for like 2% of their grade. They have to have lunch with me. So like once a week, I don't eat in front of my computer. We actually sit down at a table, and for like 45 minutes, we have lunch. And it really helped me with what you're talking about, because I'm like, my life is insane. You guys have the good old days. Like, oh my God, when I was in college, all I did was have fun. And then you talk to them and you're like, oh yeah, you guys are really busy. You have jobs. You have mental health things. You're dealing with dating and identity development and all the things that come with young adulthood. And when you actually talk to your students, especially outside the classroom, and this is just a conversation where we're sometimes talking about class and sometimes not, you just realize they have so much going on. And it's so easy when you're at midlife to completely forget that. And so I really want to echo the importance of us engaging with our students and letting them tell us, because then then you see them more as human beings and you realize, wow, they have a lot going on.
Are there any other? That's awesome. Do you do that as a group, or are those small, like one-on-one?
I do it through the scheduler function in Canvas, and so I set them up at the beginning of the semester, and they go in and sign up for them.
And are they individual with you, or are they
They're
groups?
five at a time usually, and then I also learn, we really didn't like this, or wow, can you believe so-and-so said that in class, or whatever. So we just are also having more casual conversations, but it's really, really useful. And like I said, I'm just going to sit in front of my computer and work or waste time on an app or something on my iPad while I eat, so I might as well make it useful.
Yeah, great. So this is a great sort of segue into I think of that as like a sort of hack towards the kinds of larger goals we're talking about. Are there other things, little strategies you guys have found that that help you with that, building those kinds of connections outside of your regular classroom pedagogy, or as part of, right?
I use a lot of social media, and it's sort of what Claire is saying, like Twitter and Facebook, not so much. Twitter and Instagram, to get to know other sides of my students. I think, especially with Instagram, a lot of our students, right, have multiple Instagram accounts. They have one that they might share with the professors, right? But I think that there's something about the visual narrative as to getting a glimpse, right? There's this construct of the figured worlds that they're trying to present and show, and then it's a window into the world that they want you to see. And then if you show that and they show that to you, then that creates some form, and it might be a false authenticity. It's not real, but at least it opens up that way that we can have that connection.
I think for me, in that 4-sequence assignment that I talked about today, that first one was that personal narrative. And I told them, you don't have to tell me the deepest, darkest secrets of your life, but I just want you to be comfortable using I in your prose. And that completely changed their relationship with writing, and then also the way that they were engaging in their scholarship. And I remember small details, because I told them to reflect on the discourses of family, entertainment, school, and community. And so I remember one student, she was raised in a dual language immersion type system, and that's kind of impacted the way that she views the world. And I was able to kind of recognize those things throughout the semester and tell her that I remember those things. And I think when students know that you care about those details and that you're able to articulate it back to them, it shows that you are as actively learning as they are, or you're expecting them to learn.
So
I have a few other hacks that I could mention.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She's good with the hacks.
Two other really quick hacks
bring 'em.
is I have my students do a video intro as like in the I teach online and in person. So two things about online students. So first of all, I'd have them do video introductions and like introduce us to your family, and I do it by introducing them to my family because it's family development. And that, holy cow, you learn a lot from that. And I remember my first semester I ever taught that class, I had them do that. And the first student that posted was an immigrant, had met her husband online. He was from Central Ohio. She was from China. He went over to China, met her, brought her back. They had 2 kids. So it like touched on so many things we talk about in the class. Online dating, that she was immigrant. They were a couple that was, mixed race couple, et cetera. Like so many things. I was like, wow. And she was a mother. I would never have known that. So that was really cool. So that's a really cool, and I got that idea from the Canvas, like what's that community thing you can go to on Canvas where you can like see other people posting stuff? Then there's like this play, I can't remember what it's called, but anyway, there's a place on Canvas where you can get ideas for things, and I got it there. And then the second thing I was going to mention is that for my online students, I only respond, I got this at the OLC conference, so I didn't think of this myself. But with all my online students, I try to respond to every one of their messages with a video. And number one, that's fast. I love to save time, and productivity is like a thing I'm passionate about, and it's faster. So I'll say, hi, Claire, I'm so sorry I can't give you an extension on that assignment, but good news is you get to drop one of your assignments. So so it should be totally fine, but I'm really glad you're in the class, and have a great day and go Bucks or something. And like I can say that so much faster than I can type it. And sometimes it's more complicated, and I'll like work through what I want to say to them in the video, and they always watch it. I've only gotten one video back, and the video back I got was really cute, but I've probably sent 200 or more videos, and it's really awesome. And they're like, they feel so special. Thank you so much for shooting that video for me, but I just do it on my computer and it's really fast. And again, faster than typing. And then it's connecting with the students. So I just wanted to mention, I really like that.
Great, thank you. I have one little add-on question on this theme, and then we're going to move along. Because again, you've kicked this off a little bit. Question from the audience: what do you do to create a sense of belonging for students in your classes? Or what environments, in your case, Anna, might have contributed to that in your learning?
Yeah, so one really quick thought I wanted to share. If you have the type of class that's small enough to go around and have the students introduce themselves by name, I strongly encourage you guys to also just have them say their pronouns, and for you to do it too. It's super easy, and like as a queer person, it has always made me feel more welcome. I've only ever had one teacher do it, and it was a graduate student. And so I just want to share that. It's easy as saying, hi, I'm Anna, I use she, her pronouns. And so that's something that really helps students feel a sense of belonging, and it's something I ended up implementing in the student clubs I ran on campus, just because I thought it was important, and they weren't clubs that related to identity at all. It was an astronomy club, but I, found out later that there were students in that class who hadn't come out as trans yet, and it meant a lot to them. And you just have no way of knowing that, or knowing what someone's gender really is. So I think that that's just something that I always think about it as a way to just help foster a sense of belonging and an acknowledgement of identity. So that's the first thing on my mind.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you.
I want to sort of flip that question. I think it's really great, and the pronouns is an example. I think it should be the norm for everything we do. One thing that I want to caution us on is also this sense that we can also create these cultural norms that are situated on what we consider normal. Many of us who work in higher ed are from a very similar socioeconomic and maybe ethno-racial background. And oftentimes that can be very othering for some of our students, right? And so being open to that, using, opening a conversation on pronouns, opening up conversations on immigration status, revealing certain things about ourselves, I think are really important. But I mean, this is something I'm struggling with a lot, is how do I connect with students who feel othered, constantly feel othered, and still feel othered by the entire aspect of higher ed? I don't know.
I think to add on to that, I teach in the Deep South. And so I think a lot of my students, I wasn't really aware, they were all really open to having these difficult conversations. And at the end of one of my semesters, I had a student say, I always ask for feedback at the end. And the student said, your class was super liberal, and I didn't feel like my conservative perspectives really had a seat at the table. And it really made me think, like, how was I thought that I was being inclusive and that I was having like these really progressive conversations, but in my effort to kind of uphold these ideals that I had, that I guess that I thought that I needed to have as an educator, I was marginalizing these other voices. And so, yeah, I completely agree with that.
I think that's hard work to meet students where they're at, and I have I'm a liberal feminist trying to reach every single student in my classroom, and I think part of the ways that I can try to do some of that is by, like I said, I try to be really vulnerable and talk about things that are uncomfortable and own things that I do, and just by being really real with the students, I feel like they're more likely to connect, and kind of like we were talking before the session started, just about, I try to connect with all the students and talk about ways that, like if we're talking about sexual activity, which is something we talk about in my class, I'll say you get to have as much sex or as little sex as you want, and we're not judging you here. And just trying to promote those kinds of ideals so that so people feel like they can have a voice in setting the tone. I don't know if I have a totally good answer, but those are some of the things I try to do.
Yeah, so it's an interesting kind of direction that we moved here. And I think about what Ethan talked about this morning with creating, kind of recognizing the importance of efficacy and helping all students feel like they have the ability to impact change in the world, and that it's not our job to be necessarily directing in which direction that change should be, right? But trying to find ways to empower and help support and create avenues for that. But obviously we're talking about bringing yourself and listening, and that means, and having vulnerable conversations. And I can imagine that can feel not only vulnerable, but also potentially scary for someone who is responsible for a classroom and is responsible for people feeling to some degree safe and like there is a place for them in that classroom. How would you all respond to that? How do you think about those things? What are responsibilities too?
Well, I think it was like this semester was kind of a hard semester for me. I had a group of students that was pretty privileged, in my opinion, and also freshmen. So in coming into my classroom, it was like the first time they had been exposed to a lot of the things I was talking about, which, talking about gender, talking about race, talking about microaggressions, just talking about lots of different things. And I have TAs that help me kind of run the class. And I remember we were at our TA meeting, and my one student, and she's queer, she's Black, and she had a couple of these really privileged students at her table, and I know she just wanted to roll her eyes so hardcore at almost everything they were saying during our active learning discussions. And I just had to keep saying, like, we're taking the long road here, we're taking the long game. They may not get it this semester, they may get it another semester, but we've got to treat them with respect and not shame them for their ideas, and just, even when you want to roll your eyes because they're saying something sexist, we need to find ways to do that in a non-shaming way because they're just learning. And I think that remembering that can help with that, especially as we're trying, I want them to leave my class advocating for those less privileged than them. And if I'm shaming them about their privilege, that's not going to help. You know what I'm saying? So, and I had no idea how this semester was going to go, but I finally got over the fear of opening my teaching evaluations. It took me do you guys have that fear when you're like, oh God, do I have to look at them? It took me 4 days. And I was like, okay, I'm in a mental place where I can open them. And I opened them. And actually, I had a 70% response rate, and then they could have been in the 30% that didn't respond. I don't know, but I do think I got through to some of them, and a lot of them all came with the last day of my lunches, and they all came at the same time. And a couple of them had mentioned noticing microaggressions. So I feel like you couldn't just make that up to make me happy. And I wasn't grading them on the lunches. So I do think if you can try to do it in a not shaming, judgeful way with your students and meet them where they're at, you can get through.
And just to kind of add, I think for me, the classes that have meant the most and that I've gotten the most out of are those that foster a sense of connection with my fellow classmates. And so actually, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Dr. Elizabeth Wellman in the back of the room there. So she was one of my theater professors, and in her class, something really, it was just a really special class because it really fostered this sense of connection and community with the other people in the room. And there was always room at the end of the day to just check in with each other. And that was so amazing and different than any class I'd ever had. And I understand that that might not be easy to work into every single class, every single subject, but it was just really impactful for me because it was just like your high of the week, your low of the week, in however many words. Sometimes it was just like a one-word sentence or, just kind of quick check-ins with the class, but it helped going back to the idea of seeing everyone in the classroom as a full person with these own experiences. And as a learner, it made me feel closer to the people around me. And I have always learned more in classes where I feel like I can talk to the student sitting to my left or my right. And that's something that I haven't had in each, lecture-style classroom. And so I think that's an important thing fostered by active learning, as well as this, opportunity to just check in with your students and allow them to check in with one another.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful because there was a question that came in, how can we get to know students without asking generic questions like, tell me a fun fact? So that's that's helpful. So we've talked about what I find actually a really fascinating range of definitions of active learning and about kind of inclusion and vulnerability in the classroom. We haven't actually talked a whole lot about technology, and I am kind of interested in whether there are either innovative teaching strategies, we've talked some about teaching strategies, maybe a little more, teaching strategies or technologies that you are using to effectively engage students. And I would like to just offer the opportunity. We often hear from people that this conference can at times err on the side of focusing on like the rock star technology perspective where people are doing crazy things. So if there's like entry level technology things that you're doing, we welcome hearing some of those too.
So yeah, I'm happy to share. So the technology I work with mostly is 3D printing. So I know that's something not everyone has access to, but it is something that has been really helpful, especially with working with blind students, because we can create these tactile ways to learn. And so we've done a lot with different 3D printed galaxies and different topics within the STEM fields to make these tactile models. But something really important that I learned working at a school for the blind in Cape Town was that you don't need these high-end technologies to make your work engaging and accessible. And I'll always remember the thing that these students were most excited about weren't my, complicated 3D printed galaxies or my tactile moons. It was the Play-Doh planets that I had put together the night before for them. And so this was just this tactile scale of the solar system where I had Jupiter as a basketball and Saturn as a soccer ball. And each time I put one of the planets in their hands, they literally squealed with delight because they were so excited to be learning something new and to be learning it in this tactile way made just for them. And so that was something really important to me because, yes, I love the technology and it allows us to do these amazing things, but I didn't need it to connect with them. All I needed was to think about something they could understand. And it was as simple as, I had oranges representing Neptune and Uranus and the different, representations that we connect to things that they knew and that they are already familiar with. And so that was something that really stuck with me, was this idea that, accessibility and active learning can just be a mindset shift, and it's something that's possible regardless of your technology availabilities.
I love what you said in terms of like that mindset shift, because I think that that's where it really all begins. And so a lot of my colleagues in my program, they're game scholars, and so they're doing stuff like with Minecraft education, and I don't have any background in that, and I don't necessarily know how to do that, but the thing that they taught me is it's not just, we add points to this, and instead of grades, we promote a completely different way of thinking in the classroom, where you encourage play, where you encourage actual taking ownership of things. And I was also having a conversation with someone at breakfast, because we talk about students not being motivated by grades, but how do we actually do that when the systems of grades are still in place? And so we were just talking about maybe changing terminologies themselves. For example, I have a colleague and he's gamified his entire writing class. And so instead of assignments, he calls them raids. And he has students have personas, like develop game or avatars. And so he said, like, if you're a warrior, you're going to write 200 extra words for each assignment because that is your identity. If you're a bard, you're going to create some sort of creative, like a song or like a picture or something in order to think through the ideas. And so they choose an identity that they feel is not necessarily represented when it's just like, this is an A-level grade or this is that. It's not a static identity, and they can really personalize their avatar and operate in the classroom based on that personalized experience.
I have a really low-tech option. One thing I like to do is, like, if you're talking about so first of all, I use dry erase boards because I teach in active learning. I teach in Pomerene 280, which is one of our innovation classrooms. However, before I taught in there, I would use like large Post-it notes, which are kind of expensive, but if you could try to get your department to buy them for you. And I just bought a bunch of markers, and we would use those. And then I had students take a picture, like I have them like, well, you guys are gonna kind of laugh at this, but I have them write down their characteristics of their perfect partner. Right, and so they like write down as a group like what their perfect. It's like these people don't exist. Okay, it's like humble. Like they're the the most empathetic people in the world and so kind, and they're very funny too, and they like to exercise and like to do all this stuff. So then I have to take a picture of that, and then like 3 class periods later, we talk about how people have way too high of expectations of their partners today. That's a whole nother conversation we could have. And then I have them come back to their perfect partners and then like be like, okay, like that picture, the photo that I had them take. Okay, how realistic were you guys? And they were like, oh yeah, we weren't that realistic. So there's an example of very low tech, just shooting a picture and then remembering where you put it. In this case, they can post it on Canvas to like their student group space. I did teach a digital flagship class this semester. I did, and one thing that we haven't talked about today, and I wrote down, is that we haven't talked about the non-content related skills that are really important. And with all of the accessibility conversations we're having, a lot of what we're talking about is these non-content related things that are going to help our students achieve. And I think that one thing that happens is we just assume our students can do all the things with technology that we can do, but I interact with my computer totally differently than my students interact with their computers. So I also think there's something to be said for thinking about what are the non-content skills around technology, around everything that we talk about, that are really important for my students to know, because they don't interact with their technology the same way that I never get on Instagram. Now I'm wondering about it, Teddy, after what you said. But I'm like, just, I don't know. I read the news on my phone. I don't know. I tweet sometimes. But I just don't do what they do with it.
All right, so we have got 4 minutes left, and we are now going to enter the lightning round phase of our questions. Think of it sort of like a game show. Okay, so because there's good questions coming in through Twitter, so I'm just going to throw a couple of these out there. How did you overcome technology anxiety using new technologies that you've never used before to teach? What advice can you give to those who haven't added technology to their teaching delivery? Maybe Shauna can address this. That was all the question.
Okay, so the amazing thing about this is there are so many resources online that students can teach themselves basically this technology. All you have to do is provide the opportunity.
Nice, boom. Okay, lightning round achieved. What kind of resources are you guys using at Ohio State to support your active learning / technology enhanced / better pedagogy in the classroom, lightning style?
Flipgrid. Flipgrid? It's dope and it's free, right? It's and it allows students, especially students who are constantly watching YouTube videos, that video-based narrative of doing like a vlog style talk, so that for many of our students, they're actually learning a lot of their stuff from YouTube videos, right? And so it allows that narrative style to enter into how they explain and create understandings and show you that they understand, that they can explain and talk about the things that you want them to talk about.
And in 20 seconds or less, what is Flipgrid?
Flipgrid is a secure online video platform that allows short-form videos that you can set up for your class.
Thank you, Teddy. Anyone else? Okay. What is the role of today's educator in promoting mindful use of technology and helping students avoid digital distraction? And maybe let's also say like digital overwhelm.
I have a video that I made for my students with all the tips that I do myself to get stuff done, and then I turned it into a blog post too on my blog, and I also made it into a written thing. So I pushed that out to all my students, and then I quizzed them on it. And I think they actually used it, because they do mention, oh, now whenever I'm trying to study, instead of taking a break on YouTube, I'll go take a walk, and then come back to what I'm doing.
Nice. Can you tweet that out, please? Hashtag
Absolutely.
Innovate with you. Thank you. And we have 1 minute left. So I'm going to ask you this final question. We're celebrating 10 years of Innovate today, looking ahead to the next 10 years. So this is an ambitious question. What is one technology trend that you see making a big impact on the classroom? Everyone has to answer before you can leave this room. Not you,
Yeah.
them.
I think I like indigenous knowledge. I mean, the knowledge that doesn't come from these, middle-class Eurocentric norms.
Thank you. Next.
Yeah. So I'm really interested in these accessible technologies like 3D printing, but looking into the future, one of the things that has amazed me most, I recently met a group of blind chemists who are working with this board. You essentially can connect it to a microscope or to anything, and you can download any image to it, and it creates a tactile erased map it's a pin board with like hundreds of pins, and this is something that you can use in the science classroom by connecting it to things like microscopes. And the next phase is maybe we connect it to telescopes, and maybe we download our textbook images to this. And so I'm really excited about these types of technologies that I think can make a really big difference for the way any student might learn.
Thank you.
I think virtual reality, I don't know much about it, but I have a colleague who is really interested in climate change and conservation, and she was saying that the ways in which we intervene in that problem could potentially damage the environment and continue to perpetuate the very problem that we're trying to address. Whereas in virtual reality, you're able to have that same immersive experience and kind of get a similar experience to being in that location without damaging the environment. And so I think those types of super immersive experiences could be cool in the
Right.
next 10 years.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't think I have a good answer better than what you all said. That all sounds awesome, and I really want to Google all that.
All right, you guys have been so generous and so interesting to talk to. I could probably stay here all afternoon, but we won't do that. So thank you guys, all of you. Thank you so much, and thanks for being here and for your wonderful questions.